So let me begin with China. China is an enormous economic experiment. It should be understood in that light. It should not be held up to standards that don't apply to an enormous historical experiment. Let me explain. A half a century ago, China was, by all counts, among the poorest, most backward countries on this planet, and had been in that position, a position that Xi Jinping refers to often as a period of humiliation, for 2 or 3 centuries, during which large and small colonial powers could simply arrive at a port city along the Pacific coast of China, send in a few cannons, a few troops, and establish an enclave, a portion of a city which would be for them and their nationals to set up shop and to exploit whatever opportunities for trade might exist. Over the last half century, this country, now numbering roughly 1.4 billion people, that is over 4 times the population of the United States, much larger than Europe, and so on and on. Over this relatively short historic time, half a century, more or less, they went from the worst poverty imaginable. For those of you who have never read a Western work on China at that time, the work of a missionary family, the author Pearl Buck, B-U-C-K, The Good Earth, I believe, is the title of her novel. She wrote more than one. Would give you an insight. You won't forget it. The images are incredible in that book. So here you are, half a century later, and it is the admirable object of almost disbelief, or in the case of Paul Krugman, straight out disbelief. Nobody has believed it. They didn't believe it in the 1950s and 60s when there was talk of communes and of incredible rates of growth. They didn't believe it later on when the government shifted. They didn't quite believe it when Russia and China came to loggerheads that included military conflict between them. They didn't believe it more recently when economic growth rates were listed every year between 6 and 9%, and sometimes even more, when the usual relationship between GDP growth in China and that in the United States was a relationship of 3 to 1, 3 times faster in China than in the United States. More recently, when they said they had lifted somewhere between 6 and 800 million people out of global poverty into middle income level, people didn't believe that either. People didn't believe any of it. The most typical reaction of intellectuals from the West going to China and coming back was a statement that began, "You can't really believe it, but," and then they would describe modern cities that they had visited, modern institutions, and, because we're going to end up there, the peculiar quality of China that instead of allowing slums to develop, they build the housing ahead of the people's ability to afford to buy it, meaning that there are blocks of empty, completed or nearly completed apartments. As if this were some sign of massive resource investment that had gone astray, rather than a strategy, which, by the way, may be the wrong strategy, but it's a strategy coming out of a country which, strategically speaking, is not the first one you would want to throw stones of criticism at. But it is a huge country. It has serious raw material and food issues. It has a history of an expatriate community elsewhere around the world of Chinese citizens with complicated relationships back home. It is trying things of all kinds, some of which don't work, because that's what experiments are all about. So yeah, they have problems, they have imbalances. Their record in the field of civil liberties is not what you want. There's all kinds of social criticisms that can be made, and by the way, are made in and by Chinese people about what's going on there. So this is in no way what I'm about to say, no way some kind of celebration of China as if they don't have serious political, economic, and cultural problems. They do. But they're quite different from those in the United States. And the way to begin to understand the difference is to go back to look at it, the big picture. The United States is an empire going down. China is an empire going up. And the ride up is way better than the ride down, as Americans are discovering, and as the British have an entire century of having had to live through. And if you study Britain at all, you will know just how painful it all has been, economically, politically, culturally, financially, you name it.